Hello and welcome along to the Panto podcast. This week my guest is actor, director and producer Susie McKenna. In this episode she tells me about her beginnings as a humble Pontins bluecoat, playing a fearless principal boy, and how she's always been keen on learning on the job. So please sit back and enjoy the latest Panto podcast. My guest for today's Panto podcast is Susie McKenna. Hello, Susie.
Hello.
And we're here at your new home.
My new home, yeah. We're here at the Kiln Theatre. We're actually sitting in the cinema at the moment. And I'm about to start co-directing with Teo Lawson, NW Trilogy, which opens in September.
So what prompted the move then?
What prompted the move? When I left Hackney, I stepped down at Hackney Empire as creative director in 2017. There were all sorts of reasons for that, namely being that it felt to me that their concentration on opera was not what I wanted to put my name to in terms of producing opera. It wasn't really me. As people who know me would know, that's definitely not me. And so as someone who was there as artistic director, I felt that if it was going to go in that direction, I felt it was time for me to go. And I felt that I'd done nearly 8 years of 7 days a week. I'd given up my acting career to do that in terms of something had to give. There were parts of me that weren't necessarily being fed. As most artistic directors will tell you, be careful what you wish for. And once you're part of a building, and once you've got a responsibility of a building and the people who work in there, and its audience, and the community, and when I was creative director, I also headed up all the creative learning as well as programming. There's only, that I did need to sit in a darkened room for a little while after I left. And I think I found the politics difficult at times. So I think, it was time for me to do that. And I didn't, I agreed to stay on, and I developed a couple of shows that I'd been developing there. I continued to do, such as King, Martin Smith's King, and we did a concert there. And I'm looking at doing that elsewhere now. And there were a few things I was still developing that I continued to do. And then, of course, I continued to do the pantomime until 2019. So it was a gradual weaning off, if you like. It was hard. I'm so passionate about that theatre and Hackney itself and what we achieved as a team over that time. Not just the 21 years of pantomime, but just in terms of when I took over at Hackney, we were closed and we were given a year to open up. We opened 6 months later, and we managed to keep afloat and get back on our feet again. So I'm proud of that, but there is a certain exhaustion that you get. And I started to think about wanting to perform again, and I started to think about what I wanted to do creatively, which of course running a building doesn't give you time to do. No matter the best will in the world, it doesn't. And so, and with Hackney not really being a producing house, it's more of a presenting house, the scope for me to be able to explore that side of me was better that I would be going freelance again. So that's what happened. Doing the pantomime up until Dick Whittington 2020, so 2019 going into 2020, was for me, I'd managed to start thinking about changing of the form again. I'd always spent the last 21 years thinking about how I could develop the form, shift the form more into the 21st century. What does that mean? Questioning myself and our team around us all the time about what that means to doing pantomime now. And also to the audiences that we had, which is, you literally could have a family, a mum in a burqa with her kids. Then on the next row, you could have a mix-up family, multi-racial family on one side. Then you've got a huge, loads of people. You look out, and the range of audience at Hackney was extraordinary, and so how do you serve that audience, and what does that mean in terms of keeping them engaged and having a sense of ownership. So we'd been on a journey, and so Dick Whittington, doing the Windrush Dick Whittington in 2019-20 was another shift for me. I was terrified, and a lot of people were telling me it was a really crap idea, and a lot of people were saying to me it was the dangerous idea, and so I'm all for feeling the fear and doing it anyway, as I've always been. Gets me into trouble sometimes, but and we did it, and I was very proud of it, and so, not that I felt like my job is done, not by any means, but it was like, how long do you go on for, 21? And inevitably, it felt to me that unless we could really think about growing the show, changing the show, being brave with the show as we go forward again, perhaps having a 3-year plan where we could invest more in the show, because it was still does, makes a third of the income of Hackney Empire, and had done for many years before that. So when actually, because of financial issues and also a focus that the theatre was shifting to, it felt for me that I didn't want it to peter out. Do you mean? I mean, maybe that's just me having an ego that shouldn't be thinking that way. But it was more about me being worried that sustaining Hackney Empire Panto to the level that we were was always a challenge for me. I was challenging myself. I wasn't really looking outside and thinking, well, who were the rivals? It was more about, how can we keep this up, in terms of the lovely reviews that we get and the support that we got, and the audience and their expectations. How long can you keep that up for, and how can you keep it fresh? And when I sort of felt that I wasn't sure if I had that backing really to keep it fresh, and the expectation was, well, it's okay, isn't it? We just carry on. I was, maybe the coward in me or whatever that may be, I felt that was something that if I couldn't realise it in that way, and I couldn't feel like I could develop the show and really shift some ideas behind it and think about how we invest in the show, then it was time for me to take a step back and maybe also get that time. And obviously, as you said, my new home, by then I was already working here as associate director at Kiln, and I'd done Blues in the Night, and then I joined the company. And I felt that I was suddenly a lot of my head was about new work, new writing. That's what this place is about, which is dearly a love of mine. And to have that opportunity was incredible. And I realised quite how much everything I'd wished for in terms of changing the emphasis of where I was creatively was happening. And the idea of then doing a big London show and a big pantomime on top of that, I did that. But it sort of feels like by walking away, as hard and as heartbreaking as it is, and it is, I assure you, but if it wasn't going to be what I wanted it to be, then I had to go, you know what, I think I need to step back and let someone else have a go, and also it freed up my brain and my headspace to do other things, which is sort of what I'm doing now.
Well, I'm sure they're going to have, and you're going to have a lot of fun here.
Yeah, we already are, but it's going to be good, I think.
We were speaking before, and you were telling me about your family. Normally I ask people, do you come from a theatrical family? And I'm going to ask you that exact same question.
Well, my mum and dad were variety acts. So my dad was quite a bit older than my mum, and he was in ENSA during the war. And he was based in Burma, Singapore, and stayed out there until way after 1945. So I think, I'm not quite exactly sure when he came back to the UK. I think it was something like 47. Might have been earlier, but... So he was a singer and a big crooner. Some people called him the Britain's Bing Crosby because he looked a bit like Bing Crosby, and he really did, actually. And he was a big fan. he had a big voice. It was always, he'd always go for the big money note at the end. That was my dad. And so he was then he did some stuff with the BBC, played Leeds City Varieties. He was on that circuit. His big number was Buddy, Can You Spare a Dime, and other things. So, and then he met my mum, and both of them come from West London, which is another reason why Kiln is dear to my heart, is that I'm back in, if you like, my family's manor. Both my sides of my family came from around here. And so he met my mum. My mum was a lot younger, and she was on the circuit singing and dancing for her supper, having lost her father in the war and then really being on her own, trying to make her way. And she had an auntie and uncle who helped fund her showbiz desires. And so she was a soubrette, as you would call them in those days, a singer and a dancer who was playing, at that point, most of the big working men's clubs, places like the Ultimara and the big clubs in London, which was that was the beginning of the shift. Variety was still going, but the big working men's clubs were having huge acts. And so my mum and dad met doing that sort of variety, and then continued to do that once they got together as Ken Swain and Maureen McKenna, and sort of only really gave up, became semi-pro by the time I was born. Actually, they were semi-pro by then. Both of them, my mum in a typing pool, my dad driving for J Lions, and they would be working big shows over the weekends, like big ladies' nights, Masonic Do's, and variety theatres in the summer. And then when I was born, they went semi-pro even more. We moved up to Leicester, but that meant they could still do the Northern Circuit. And I used to go on stage with them because I was only child, and they didn't know anyone in Leicester, so I didn't have a babysitter. So I was pretty much on stage with them by the time I was 2.5. And my mum tells this story of the Dalton Trio thinking it was funny to throw me on. And of course I knew all the words, so that was that. And I was part of my mum and dad's act up until I was about 7, until my dad and mum gave up altogether and started doing Amdrams instead, and were full-time salespeople. So that was my earliest memories, really, are of being on one of those working men's clubs where the smoke filled the room, and those tables that went on forever, and coming out and singing Tiddlywinky Woo or Mother Kelly's Doorstep or Wandery Wanderer. So they gave me so much. My mum's still alive. My dad died when I was in my 20s, my dad was my biggest fan, sometimes much to my embarrassment, as you are as a teenager, or as indeed as a young artist. Always clapped the loudest in the audience, one of those.
That's my daughter.
That's my daughter, yeah, absolutely. And was well known, especially once I was on places like Nottingham Playhouse, when I was there on and off for eight years, oh, Dad's in, your dad's in. And they always used to love it, because when Dad was in, it was a good house, because he'd get the house going, much to my embarrassment. They gave me music. They gave me the fearlessness that you need to be an artist, to be a performer, in that, that idea of having that connection with the audience, being a variety artist, that talking to them and having that rapport. For me as a kid, you don't question something like that, but it was something I realised that I've never thought about it since. And that's because I was doing it from that age, I think, in terms of being worried about having a conversation with the audience. And I like my shows that I'm directing to have a conversation with the audience, even if it's not pantomime. There is a dialogue that has to happen within that, with any show. So,
When you hit 7 then, and they left your trio act, and they let you go solo, what did you do after that? How did the career progress?
Well, my mum sent me to dancing school, like from the age of, 3 or 4, I think I was. So I was having dancing lessons, and I think they're the dancing teachers in the UK are the unsung heroes of our industry. None of them get funding. They're all doing it. Half of them give half the lessons away. They're still going now. Some of the schools Leicestershire was full of amazing dancing schools, and to an extraordinary level. And much of our industry is filled with those kids who went to dancing school like me. So yeah, I did my tap and my ballet and my national and my Greek dance, and I competed in competitions for years until I was 16, 17, and my dad, who was a betting man who loved a bit of competition, I had to turn around to him and say, Dad, enough is enough now. I'm not competing anymore. I've done what I need to do.
You were his little racehorse, weren't
Yeah,
you?
I was. It was Whippet, actually, probably more likely. He was a dog's. But yeah, I think that was what I was doing. I was really, I was going to dancing class every night, near enough, and singing and being in dancing school shows, and then moving on to doing sort of professional cabaret while I was still at school, which I probably shouldn't have been doing. And still always performing, and always and competition. That's the Sunshine competitions that they were called then, the All England ones. Funnily enough, were held at Hackney Empire while I was running it, and I was a judge, and I took my mum, and my mum sat there, and she went straight back to the years where she would sit in the audience while we were competing. So that's sort of where I learnt to sing and dance and begin to learn to act. And I was in a lot of amateur dramatics things. I was in Sound of Music at 7, and then played Lisa when I was 16. And there's a big Amdram scene in the Midlands as well. And then I was in a place called the Little Theatre. There's a place called the Little Theatre at Leicester. I think it's still going, actually, in Dover Street, which is an amateur repertory theatre. And it's all straight plays. And I did some of that before I went off to become a bluecoat in what was supposed to be my gap year. So I left. I wasn't supposed to leave school at 16, but I did. And there were reasons why I did in terms of personal reasons, but the main reason was that I got into arts educational school when I was 16, and I was supposed to go down to do that. And in the meantime, I took my O-levels, obviously, and went straight to Prestatyn Sands with my mate Marie. We were a double act, and we were bluecoats at Prestatyn Sands, and I loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Did you do the knobbly knees?
Knobbly knees, King Kong competition. We did all the comparing. I called bingo, and the first time I called bingo, I called 99, and they nearly had there was war. Needless to say, I wasn't asked to call bingo for a while after that. I had to be the second which I hated. We had to the girls had to be seconds to the wrestlers when they came, which meant you had to hold the spit bucket. And then 9 times out of 10, they would get you into the ring to cop a feel. It was not great. But that was one of the things we would do. But, I mean, it was an amazing time. And then I then was having such a good time, I deferred my entry for a year to Arts Ed to carry on doing that, much to my dad's annoyance. And then within that time, by the time I was 18, I got into Hair, the national tour of Hair. I didn't go to drama school in the end. I wish I had. I'd love to have spent some time just not grafting, but I'd basically been grafting since I was 16 and I'm still grafting now, That was it, really. It wasn't the easiest way to get into the business. But I was a dancer initially and, auditioned like everyone else. I got into Hair and did a national tour, and that sort of changed. But that's if you like, the ignorance and the arrogance of youth, to feel like you can I'll just do it now. I'm just earning a bit of money now, and I'm down in London and all of that. And we are Londoners, so I couldn't wait to get back to London. So I was back in London by the time I was 17. But I think if I think now, there was a part of me going, it would have been nice to have just concentrated on your art or your skills. But I sort of was doing that as I was working. I was still taking class, still took dance classes at Pineapple and stuff. So I still never feel like I stopped training. I still feel like that now in terms of there's always something to learn. So I carried on training and was lucky enough to be given roles in straight plays by John Jewers down in Swansea, and one of the last places that was still doing 2 weekly rep in those days. So I was there for the whole summer season, and managed to watch people like Mena Trussler and Des Barrett and Freddie Lees just do their stuff, And as a young actor, what would I have been then, 19? watching those people do what they do, and yeah, it was an amazing training ground, and I feel very lucky and blessed to have been part of that scene, doing that.
We haven't spoken about Panto yet.
No, we haven't. Well, it was my first job. Of course, it is everybody's first job. My first after I'd done Blue Coat, the first Panto I did was I auditioned out the back of the stage. There was an advert for ensemble needed for Colchester Mercury Theatre pantomime, and so I went along and got the job, and I was 16. Yeah, that was the end of the Blue Coat. Went and did the pantomime at Colchester, and that was my first panto as an ensemble member, and it starred Angela Bruce, who was of Angels fame in those days, the BBC Nurse Show and that. But it was a subsidised theatre pantomime, so it wasn't a big commercial panto. But it was very much Chris Emmett was writing it then, and indeed was in it, I think, as Dame at one point. But yeah, so I did a couple of years there as an ensemble member.
And I take it you enjoyed it.
I loved it.
The camaraderie with all the cast.
Yeah, it was just an amazing learning ground. And so, yeah, to just be, really early on, to be that young and to be in the professional arena and watching people do what they do was an amazing learning ground. And then I suppose the biggest jump was then at 19, I auditioned for Kenneth Alan Taylor and was given my first principal boy up at Oldham Coliseum. And that's when the real learning curve began, in terms of Kenneth's passion for the art form, really teaching me how to be a principal boy, what that meant. I was always a tomboy, so the idea of playing a boy on stage was absolutely not a problem for me in terms of finding that side of myself. To be able to be the hero. I mean, it was my dream come true, to be honest. I always wanted to be Batman. So it was like, what better thing to do than to be the hero of a story? And even better, what better to be able to do it in heels and fishnets and still be able to get the boys who were 7 cheering for you at the end. That's the joy of a principal boy. Especially in traditional terms. So, pantomime really came into my heart and soul really at that point, actually, when Kenneth cast me as Dick Whittington at Oldham. And, I remember when I think about it now, it's like singing full-on Fame with piano and drums, and imagining the orchestra behind me. But there you had the wonderful Chris Smith making the piano sing with the drummer, and still feeling like you were in a big show. But the idea of the connection with the audience then, the audiences in Oldham are incredible as well. So, and very vocal. So, of course there was the odd cry of lesbian when you were doing the love scenes and things. And,
yes.
you know what I mean?
Yes.
The minute...
And it is a little boy thing.
It's a shock, yeah. and I think that's it, And it was always, I felt always very responsible when I played. I mean, I've played, and I ended up playing Principal Boy for 8 years at Nottingham Playhouse, and I remember playing Robin Hood. I mean, I was begging Kenneth not to to be Robin Hood, because at the time the TV series was on. I can't remember who it was now. Michael Praed, and I thought, God, the kids are going to go, what? Because it was on the TV, and also you're in Nottingham, remember? So Robin Hood is their hero. And I was like, you're really going to go for it, aren't you, Kenneth? Yes, I want you to play Robin Hood. Oh, my God. And so I literally did go and had fight lessons and learnt to fight with a pole and jump over the pole whilst wearing stilettos. And because I was vain enough to go, I'm sorry, but I'm 5'2" and there's no way I'm not going on in heels. So yeah, it was, there was a responsibility. So yeah, my years at Nottingham and the passion that Kenneth instilled in all of us in terms of how important pantomime was, that it was the first time that often children and even some adults come to the theatre, that there was an onus on us to be that actually, you know, that the story was everything, that for certain characters, one had to hold on to the story whilst the anarchy was going on around you, so that there was truth and heart, and that the people in the audience cared what happened at the end. And I guess that was the simple message that he instilled in me. And, you know, woe betide you if you didn't do something truthfully on there. And of course, then you suddenly realise that opens up. If you're truthful, you can be as big as you want. That's the art of it. And you suddenly realise this. Watching Kenneth play Dame, it's an art form, you know. And lucky enough to see people like Arthur Askey, lucky enough to see Des Barrett and Freddie Lees and those people playing Dame, you realise that pantomime performers are fearless. And I guess that's where I go back to my parents going, kiddo, it ain't scary to be on stage. And this, you know, you have the power and all of that. That came with me in order to be able to play Panto. Because there's plenty of fantastic artists who've never done Panto who suddenly, especially when I was at Hackney, obviously there were artists like, off the top of my head, Joanna Riding, right? Never done a Panto, but came to play with us because of the reputation we were gaining, and she'd come and brought her kids and seen it, you know, and she's like, I want to be in this, I want some of this, you know. And but you know, still of all the performers, and it's not just her, there were others too. Josephine Gabrielle mentioned it in terms of the difference of going out there and having that instant conversation and what that means, and how we have to have a third ear out for laughter, and how it's strictly choreographed, which they are, in terms of where the focus is and where the laughs are, and how you get 1,000 children to look somewhere, or how you get them to understand a story. You know, yeah, it's not an easy art form. It's amazing, and I never stop learning. You never stop learning on it. You learn something different every time you do it. And Kenneth was totally instigative in me thinking about whether I might direct it one time. As it is, I fell into it by accident, but I would sit in lighting sessions in general. I'd sit in lighting sessions because I find the technical side fascinating, always have. And my favourite time is still the tech on any show. So, yeah, I think that the whole, I think once if you play a role like Principal Boy or the Dame or whatever, you realise the power that it gives you. You have to be fearless, because if the audience, particularly children, if they smell fear, they'll jump on it immediately. So you have to go out there and be in control of all of that, of the audience and everything. And Nottingham was where I met Clive. So Kenneth wasn't playing Dame one year, and it was Aladdin. So it was sort of, it wasn't the last show I did there, but it was one of them. It was probably about 1989, something like that. And Kenneth had said to me, I've found this incredible guy. He's just amazing. And I knew it must be special for Kenneth to take a step back and allow what was actually a young actor at the time. I don't think Clive was that long out of drama school at that point, probably 2 years maybe. Might have been a bit longer, not that much out of drama school. And of course he was the formidable performer that, you know, he was at that point, but he'd never done Panto. And I think maybe he'd done some amateur ones, but he'd never done Panto, and he's playing Widow Twankey and I was Aladdin, and we had the most incredible time. But I saw him, you know, he was dressed in amazing costumes designed by Robert Jones. And I just remember him being, it must have been terrifying for Clive at the time, because there he was standing on Kenneth's shoes, you know what I mean? And there he was, probably one of the first black dames ever to play in this country. And he walked out onto that stage and the audience just went up, you know, just embraced him immediately. How could you not? And I saw the change in him, from the nervousness of like not sure what to trust, what to trust. Is this going to work? Really? Is this going to work? You know, and Kenneth's going, I assure you it'll work, you know, and then you saw him just go, oh my God. And the same with Joe Ryden, the same with those wonderful performers who hadn't done it before going, this is something else. This is like nothing else I've ever done before. And of course he flew and was a great Dame. And I mean, it was, nearly 10 years later that he came and did pantomime for me at Hackney, because Hackney, I'd done a couple of pantomimes at Hackney. In fact, there was a producer called Christopher Lillicrap, and they were called Muffin Productions. And he was producing at Nottingham, at Hackney, and I just got a phone call saying, do you want to direct it? And no one had ever asked me to direct the traffic, let alone a show. So I heard myself saying yes, and then put the phone down going, what the flip have I done? And he said, oh, but you have to be in it as well. And and I was living at Hackney at the time. And the minute I stepped in at Hackney Empire, that was that, really. I just fell in love. It was the most extraordinary theatre. And I'd toured, you know, and they were all beautiful. So many of the Matchams particularly are. Walking into Hackney was just something else. And she has some magic as a theatre. She grabs you. If you're for her, she grabs you and you stay. And sometimes you don't know why you're staying, but you do. And there was something incredibly magical and powerful. So I did a couple of pantos there for Muffin. No, I did one for Muffin, and then I actually produced the second one because they didn't have any money to do it. So I thought, at the time I was running a TV company that made documentaries, so we could put the pantomime there in that way. And so we did Cinderella with Tony Whittle, who's a stalwart, obviously, in our pantos there, but he was Ugly Sister with Regina Fong, and the people would remember Reg has been one of the best drag acts of the time, and was being at the Black Cat and all on the circuit and that. And he was wonderful, Reg. Sadly, no longer with us. But so we did Cinderella, and then I got into Cats, which is actually what happened. I got into Cats and stayed in Cats for 2 years, nearly 3, and but during that time, I pitched the idea of Hackney Empire producing their own, because I'd seen the power and the transformation at Nottingham Playhouse. Nottingham Playhouse had never had a panto. It was seen as more of a highbrow theatre to have a panto. And then, of course, when Kenneth arrived, he wanted to do a pantomime there, not least to help pay off the deficit that he'd inherited. And I saw the power of it. I saw the power of a pantomime that is very much steeped where it is, as opposed to something that moves around from year to year, that actually it was written and made for the people of Nottingham Playhouse, for the audience, for the people of Nottingham and the surrounding area. And I could see the power in that. And I saw the transformation in the theatre in terms of financially, things were better and had its own. You know, we were up against the big commercial one at the Theatre Royal, and who in those days were playing till Easter virtually. And it wasn't long before the shift came, and we were very much competitors, and indeed their run shortened, and Nottingham Playhouse is lengthened to the point where we would play easily to the end of January, beginning of February ourselves. And I guess that is what I wanted for Hackney. I saw the potential in terms of Hackney wasn't getting any Arts Council funding. It was really, it was struggling in a best possible way, though, because it had incredible comedy circuit. It was the one that the so-called alternative comedy circuit, and Roland and Claire were, artists like Jennifer Saunders and Lenny Henry and those acts, and Griff Rhys-Jones were all playing the Empire at that time. It was by no means floundering, but it didn't have any economic underpinning to it, not funding or anything. I don't even think from the local council at that point. So for me, I was looking at it and saying to them, listen, we do an in-house one and we build it slowly. but we could make something that's very Hackney Empire with this. So I went into Cats and left that. It was sort of poo-pooed, really. And I went into Cats and I came out of Cats in 98 and got a phone call from Simon Thompson, who at that point had become CEO. And they'd been talking about the idea. And he said, that idea about an in-house pantomime, do you want to do it? And I was like, hell yeah. And they went, well, who do you want in it? And I was like, well, the whole point is it's got to reflect Hackney. And as much as they were doing pantomimes there before, so little of it was reflecting Hackney. There wasn't, often there might have been one black performer in that, and they were usually the baddie, and it was pretty much what was happening across the country. So they said, well, how do you foresee this then? Who are you going to cast? And the first two people were, I want Clive Rowe to play Dame, if he will, and I want Stephen Edis to work with me writing the music and stuff. And then the third name on my lips was Sharon D. Clarke. Not that I knew Sharon at that time, but I'd seen her in things, and I wanted that musical theatre calibre of artist to be in the pantomimes. That's what I was looking for. And I didn't know Sharon. I knew that was the sort of artist I wanted. Who wouldn't, really? And she was amazing. So Clive said yes to Dick Whittington, and then and so did Steve. So he came on board. And then Sharon said no because she wasn't available, but she was then fairy godmother in 1999. So that was the first in-house. And when I say it's the first, it was literally me driving round to my friends in regional theatre, asking whatever bits of set they might have, could we have it? And the little bit of set we'd ended up with in terms of cloths was so old they still had Dan Leno's signature on the back. That it was that bad. And but it was a time, when often you don't have any money, that's the most creative time. And so it was amazing. We were doing it against the odds, and we weren't under any attention. Nobody knew we existed, and we did our shows, and we did 3 years like that with very little press. I think Time Out's Evening Standard and the local press were the only ones that were really noticing that we were. Do you know what? The first year we did, we could count the house. Literally, you could count it. And then it built, and actually we got the schools in really easily. So it was interesting. There was obviously a need there. The schools came, and the first year or two, it was mostly families and not a lot of black adults. So it was real noticeable. So we started to work on that and what that meant and how we would mix that all in and persuade the adults to come to that show, as well as sort of going, they go with the school and that's okay, or they go with their auntie. And so it was a conscious effort to build that audience. And so like any sort of, I hate the word brand, but like any sort of in-house show that we were trying to build, we did okay. We were washing our face just. We were, we weren't making mega bucks by any means, and we were doing it on a very tight budget. But we had, in those days, we were sort of required to have a name or such. And we had, Anita Dobson, who was incredible and loved Hackney, incredibly agreed to come and do our first one, which was amazing and a real coup. The only way we got her to do it was by not showing her the dressing rooms. I just remember taking it. She came into the stage door and I was like, "Hi, Anita, this way," and took her straight onto the theatre, because I knew that any artist walking onto the theatre from the back of the theatre, which is how you get onto the theatre at Hackney, the minute you walk onto that stage, and over my years when I was running it, it was a way of getting big people to come and play, was that you could walk onto that stage and then we would do what the famous Othman Reed, who's the technical manager there, would do the what they call the iron lift. And as the iron lifts, all the lights are on in the auditorium, and I defy any artist not want to play that house after that. It was like, oh yeah, let's throw that thing and bring them in, hook, line and sinker. It was always a way of getting people to go, yeah, of course I want to do it. So yeah, she came but those 3 years, Sharon, as I say, Sharon joined the second year, which was when we fell in love, and was the beginning of the building of the family, if you like. The Hackney pantomime family was built. Beginning, Cat B came on in the third year, and then of course we closed to do the refurbishment, which meant we were dark for 3 years nearly. It was 3 years. And we continued to do children's shows in the Bullion Theatre to keep an audience, family audience, going. And then we reopened in 2004, and that was the change. Obviously, we were reopening in a £22 million refurbished, beautiful theatre, and the work that the architect did and the work on the theatre was stunning. And great value for money if you think that the Colosseum front of house cost that alone to refurb. And we did the whole theatre. We ran out of money because the builders went bust, and we ended up having to take on the build. So by the time Hackney Empire reopened in 2004, we had £1 million worth of debt, which wasn't our fault. But it was also the beginning of the Arts Council funding us. And so, but in a tiny way, dare I say, it wasn't very much. So we were funded for core, but there was no money to produce or anything. There was no money to make shows or make things, and there still isn't in that way. But the one thing I decided during that time was that I didn't really. Well, we got to a point where the idea of having names in it, the names we could afford, didn't necessarily match what we wanted to do with the show. And I wanted something that was very story-based, and it wasn't necessarily name-based. And that was when a certain Knight of the Realm announced he was playing Dame at the Old Vic. And for some unknown reason, we'd announced Aladdin a year before, because we knew we were reopening. So we knew that Aladdin was going to be the first pantomime we were doing. And so we'd announced that title, and somehow, I don't know, maybe the Old Vic didn't get the memo, but they announced Aladdin as well, which at first threw our board at Hackney and everybody at Hackney, apart from me, into some free-falling, nightmarish panic. And so it sort of was great, because I turned around and said, well, there is no name bigger than Sir Ian McKellen. There is no point us having a name in our show. Please let me have Clive as the star and bring a company of extraordinary performers and tell our story. And I must admit, having done that and then got the green light to do that, I then had sleepless nights going, am I going to bring the theatre down? Am I actually going to bankrupt the Hackney Empire? You know, it was, I wasn't sure whether I was right. I knew I was right, but at the same time, I didn't know if I was right. You know what I mean? I didn't know how it would be received in terms of not having a name in there or anything to compete. But how can you compete with Sir Ian? I mean, you can't. So the thing that I hadn't reckoned on, and none of us had, was that because suddenly you had Sir Ian McKellen playing Widow Twankey and you had the Old Vic doing Panto, suddenly the critics, like the Charles Spencers of this world and the Nicholas de Jongs and the biggies, if you like, were like, well, we haven't had to review. I mean, Pantomime hadn't been in West End for years. So they were suddenly going, well, we haven't had to review Pantomime. They hadn't, the big broadsheets hadn't really had to that much, unless you were going to do some of the big ones outside of London. So they all came. I mean, obviously we couldn't get arrested before that. You know, we as I said, we had the Time Out and maybe the Evening Standard. We couldn't get arrested. And then suddenly, of course, you're opening a new theatre in 2004, i.e. it's the refurbished Hackney Empire. We were given an extra bit of money in order to reopen, so we could publicise a little bit better than we had before. We also had to up the budget for the show, because you couldn't get away with what we were getting away with on a £22 million refurb theatre. So, you know, the shift had to happen in a way, in terms of, you know, how we invested in the show, how Hackney Empire invested in the show. So, and we opened with no names, with just the amazing cast that we'd got, with Clive playing Widow Twankey. And of course, they all came and they all got a shock because I think expectations were low, and we were probably there to be reviewed, to be compared against, and we got that comparison, but ours was a favourable one, and a new star was born in that they discovered Clive Rowe could play Dame, and they'd never seen that before. So it was an extraordinary shift in how Hackney Empire was perceived, and because we didn't have names in it, we were seen as being a bit more of a serious show. Now, that's the snobbery around pantomime, and I don't even get me started on that in terms of that. And we were a commercial panto. But we didn't have any names in it. But there was definitely a shift in how they reviewed us and how they saw us, and that was the beginning of us, if you like, beginning of the idea that Hackney Empire Pantomime was a pantomime to come and see, really, and that it serviced London as well as Hackney, and for me it just meant I grew in confidence. I was always writing them. First one I didn't put my name on. I was so embarrassed. I thought I can't put my name to this, and I didn't have my name on it at all. I was too nervous. But then, as I say, in 2004, when all that happened and Aladdin was a big success, I gained in confidence and in writing for diverse audience and company.
What did the locals think of it then, after an absence of 3 years?
Well, they came. We were surprised. I think a lot of people thought we would do not as well as we did. We still weren't at the peak of what Hackney Empire could produce in terms of revenue, but we did well, and I think that was partly because we got better reviewed, and so therefore the whole of London were understanding that we were there. I think for the local audience, it was they wanted to come and see what this new theatre was about, and so and that actually the cast definitely reflected. It was a diverse cast. It definitely reflected not all the community, but some of them, and I think the word of mouth had got round in the 3 years before that this was quite funny, and it was for adults too. So yeah, for some reason they did come, and they loved it, and I guess we did invest in the show. We didn't we had 4 in the band. We did what we could do to the level at which we could afford. But we had great artists working on the show, like Lottie Collette designing, and we're starting to build the creative team that were the reason why Hackney Empire Panto is Hackney Empire Panto. It's a team effort, and gradually my team and my family kept building, and we could dare to dream and have ideas, and yeah, it was really well received. And then I guess that also meant I was developing the writing at the same time and learning on the job as to what we were doing and how we were doing it.
That seems to be a theme with yourself, learning on the job.
Yeah. It always has been. I'm doing that now. Don't tell anyone. But yeah, I guess it is. Yeah, it would have been nice to have spent time learning a craft. But learning on the job is definitely what is yes, the nature of my career, such as it is. But I think that's also that thing of feeling like you haven't learned enough is also a way of keeping things fresh for yourself and challenging yourself. Obviously, it also, in terms of diversity, for me, it was no-brainer that Hackney Empire Pantomime had to be diverse. Whatever was on that stage needed to reflect who was in that audience. But it was, of course, it was nerve-wracking writing for black characters, and very much, thinking about how, and also thinking about the layering that the writing of pantomime needs, in terms of you're writing a show that should appeal to an under 5-year-old, but they need to follow the story, otherwise you lose them. Then it goes into your up to 7, 8s, what that means, what character talks to them, which we know is probably Cat B. He's the one, and then you're then going further, and then you've got your adult audience, And then, of course, everybody knows in pantomime the audience has changed. So, for example, at Hackney, very much a local audience at the beginning, and interested parties in terms of people who were into panto coming early on in the previews, very local, very diverse gags, woofing, going crazy. Then you move into your family audiences and everything, which is, again, a different thing. And then you get into nights on a Saturday night where it's all adults. But then as the closer you came to Christmas, that would also change into your more middle-class audiences who would come because they don't sit in an audience like that anywhere else, and they would come to see that show and love the fact that there were some jokes that didn't necessarily land with them. And you'd hear them talking to somebody who'd laughed at that and going, what does that mean? And then the black woman in coming and telling them what it means. Or coming up to the poor sound guy going, could you tell me what ESO is? What's ESO? Or any vernaculars or any sort of slang or patois we might use. And I guess the confidence to layer the writing then was also about me being part of a black family. So, of course, as I say, Sharon and I fell in love in 1999, 2000. And so over the years, I was part of a black family. So I would hear stuff and had the confidence then to feel like I could write it a bit and be part of that. And obviously at Hackney, you're surrounded by everybody, Spanish, French, but the world and his wife worked at Hackney Empire. And still do. And so, it was an easy thing to sort of tune into what people were chatting about and what might be funny.
How does it feel on that first night, once the curtain's down, people are laughing up and raising the roof? How does it make you feel to know what you've done to those audiences? And cast as well.
Yeah, I guess I didn't have any idea what I was getting myself into when I started doing it. And if I'm honest, yes, over the years, I never tired of that feeling. I would, any chance I could get to be in as the run was going on, especially when I was running the theatre, any chance I could get to go into certain moments that I loved to see what the reactions were, whether that was, a school's audience suddenly totally going crazy because Darren Hart went into some mad bit of musical sting of a song that was big at the time, which used to go like Tumbleweed in the evenings, but suddenly you'd hear that they'd go crazy. I guess, I feel pride, I suppose, just proud of the team of what we've achieved. For me personally, the idea of mad ideas that you have that sometimes you have to fight for, and then being...
What kind of mad ideas? Tell us the ones that you're proud of, and also the ones that didn't make the cut.
Okay. I guess the most proud one was, to begin with, I guess, I think early on we did... We started to make things, and we started to think about how creatures and things could work within the show and the layering of the script. And I suppose my one of my most proud things was Tamika Empson, who's of EastEnders fame. When I first talked, it was sort of being able to bring people together, I suppose, is my proudest moments. I literally stage door Johnny'd Tamika in a sense that I went to see her in a show at Stratford, and then I turned around to her and said, and then she, at the time, I'd seen her at Stratford, then she was in our house at in the West End, and I went to see that, and I literally stage door Johnny'd her and went, I need to work with you. You need to come and do Hackney in my pantomime. And she was like, no, Suze, I don't do Panto. I don't do Panto. What is Panto? No, I don't do that. And I was like, you do this one. You will want to do this one. This is the character that I want you to do, and this is the character I want to write for you. And that was, I guess, the 2004 shows going forward then were always about me writing for the people I put in them. So I used to delay writing the script until the summer when we'd cast, and then I would write the actual I'd storyboard crazily, of course you have to design it, but I'd storyboard. So I guess for the first moment when Tamika Empson came out as the genie in the ring with Tony Timberlake and was just genius, because you don't have to write much for Tammy in order for her to make something funny. But yeah, I think just the idea of doing that wacky casting in terms of who she was as a genie in the ring. You'd certainly never seen a genie in the ring like it. And so it was those moments of being in an audience and hearing recognition laughs from a black audience or from a very Hackney audience. That was when I thought I can build on. It built on confidence for me, and I could write things, which I suppose culminated in the responsibility of telling a Windrush story through the eyes of Dick Whittington. I guess the 20 years were building up to that in terms of having that confidence of totally changing the show's perception and to something that is about a black British story. So I guess there's that. There's also, I used to draw I still do. I draw stick drawings. I'm very visual rather than cerebral in that way. So I remember it was 2009 and I wanted, we couldn't, there were no flying carpets available. So we were like, what do we do? And I was like, okay, we'll do a flying dragon. So I drew this dragon and I put this little stick man up there and I said, and Aladdin's riding on the back of a dragon and we're going to do a song called Flying on the Back of a Dragon. And people looked at this thing and went, you're mad. You're absolutely barking. And then I managed to, Scott Brooker, who continued to work with us for years after that, who was Jim Henson, Spitting Image. He was local and he came to see us at Pantomime. I can't remember which one it was. And he said, came up to me in the bar. He had his drink in his hand. He's a very big, tall guy. And he looked down at me and he went, you can't afford me, but I want to come and work with you. And he was local and he was passionate and his kids were coming. And he, again, every new member of the team added that extra layer of excellence. And suddenly we had someone of his gift, of his vision, working alongside Lottie Collette, creating a dragon, which AJ, Anna Jane Casey, who is one of the most fearless people in the industry, was flying like a madwoman across this thing that was on a crane that, quite frankly, any move wrong, you could be in trouble. So, and it was really... And when the first roar went up after we went to blackout at the end of that song, I was like, I just kept thinking of that stick drawing and how everybody was laughing at me and going, yes! And I guess, just things that land, Kenneth, Clive singing Mercy as he came out of the pool in Mother Goose. I don't know why. Everybody said to me, why is he singing Mercy? I said, I don't care. It's just they're going to go crazy if he does. And they did. And even Clive went, you were right. I was like, yeah, I know. But I suppose that's it.
And what didn't make the cut then? What weren't you allowed to do?
Oh, gosh. Thought about loads of things.
Or are there things still in the pipeline that you might bring?
Oh, no, there's big things in the pipeline. I'm thinking about a version of Sleeping Beauty that, we're still in talks about it, but yeah, there was a vision of Sleeping Beauty that we could never afford, and I would still like to do that, and there is a conversation about it. I always wanted the Windrush boat to move. We did have I was very lucky that the people running Hackney, the money people who were running Hackney at the time, often would support me as much as they could. I mean, we did build a boat that moved and opened up and did amazing things. And then, of course, Hackney's fortunes went up and down. So we were often, the budget at Hackney would depend on how we were doing as a theatre. So you had to be more creative if you had less money. But I think... there were things like I wanted Sharon to fly in at one point, and we couldn't do that for money reasons. And that was the other thing. I always wanted somebody to fly from the Circle down onto the stage. When we were doing Mother Goose, we did this thing where we filled the auditorium with puppets, a total nick from Lion King, I may add, but they were white geese. An homage. Thank you. Yeah. I'd say that. Yeah, an homage. You're right, Hayden. And I always wanted the actual idea of the goose literally flying above the audience's head and landing on the stage. We never did that. I would love to have done that, but
there's always time.
There's always time, and the idea of flying in the auditorium was always a way I would have loved to have achieved at some point. My DSM, Johnny Blunden, who is just the best in the business and was with us for 16 years. He always kept saying, "Oh, come on, Suze, do the dancing waters. Let's do some dancing waters." And I was like, "Hell no! On a rake? Are you kidding me?" But yeah, there were often things that, you have ideas at the time. But I was really lucky that even some of the maddest ideas I did, because of the talent of the creative team and their passion to do it in such a way that we could afford as well. We couldn't just throw money at it. Mm-hmm. There was a responsibility that the show needed to make a profit in order to sustain the rest of the year in some way, or to begin to sustain the theatre the rest of the year. So, of course there were things that we wanted to do, but 9 times out of 10 we couldn't afford them. So, yeah, but often some of the more mad ideas we did manage to do in the end. We did get round to it, even if it was the third time of doing that particular show, because there were obviously over 21 years. We repeated quite a few titles until we extended it from 5 to 7 titles. That helped things not having to come round quite so quickly.
One of the things you said about your variety background and the parents, how important is that to you in pantomime?
Oh, very important, in the sense that only in variety do you actually have that conversation with the audience in that way. You're breaking the fourth wall. There's also traditions, in terms of, I've always approached Hackney Empire particularly, not least because you were in that extraordinary variety house. The idea of being able to pay homage to something that might have been done 100 years before excited me, and thinking about tradition and variety. So I always love to have some real old gags in there, and also maybe some, like the plates routine, in terms of slapstick, and really I'm very traditional in that the baddie does not cross the centre. Kenneth instilled in me the rules of Panto that stick with me from now. I do not break them. And so there are certain things that have to happen that are very traditional. And how you mix that and layer it with more modern 21st century ideas is great. But the homage to, say, Morecambe and Wise, for example, there's a whole routine that is total homage to the Cleopatra routine with Glenda Jackson and even gags like, the police siren, and they'll never say I sell ice creams at that speed. They're there, but they're blatantly there for people who know Eric Morecambe to go, outrageous, but yes, it's funny. So I guess my variety, my years of watching variety with my parents as well, like those acts, going to see Panto, comics that my mum and dad worked with, and just really, that part of me being in no way, it's my heritage. So the idea of, for me, there's no snobbery in it. It's an art form, and it's actually the ability to break the fourth wall and still be believable, and still have a dialogue, and still be disciplined, and to command an audience, and to have people on that stage that genuinely have funny bones. That is something to celebrate, and I guess that's why I'm saying when I'm writing for them, I'm playing to their strengths. I can hear them saying it, and I play to their strengths, whether that's a visual thing or whether that's variety played a huge part of that. And then my passion for storytelling and making sure that something that actually the audience care. I hate going to any sort of theatre if I sit there and I don't care. And I don't think it's okay to go and see a pantomime and not give a damn about what happens at the end.
Or if there's no plot.
Or if there's no plot at all. And that's why the kids get bored. They start rolling up and down. They don't know what's gone on. And actually, sometimes you can, the kids, a lot of the kids, they love the goose, for example, or they love the cats. And so unless the goose and the cat are integral to the heart of a piece, you're sort of building them up to not care themselves. And so it is about them really wanting to care and go on that journey.
Selling the cow. Yeah,
selling the cow, hello? It's got to be done with truth. And even if you've got Clive Rose singing, I can't even remember what it was now, I Can't Live If Living Is Without You, it's done absolutely truthfully, which means you can take it as big and as camp as you want. And that's the joy. And I think that's the variety side of things in terms of how to make it work. And also I think for audiences to, if they, I think sometimes it's nice to have little moments where I just remember Tamika Empson playing Frightening Frida and Tony Whittle's playing Baron Bonkers, and they were uncle and niece. And there's a point where Tony used to sort of go, nobody loves me. And Tammy just used to go, I love you, Uncle Bonkers. The reaction it used to, and these are the two baddies, remember, but the audience reaction was, oh. And if you can make them believe in these if you can make the audience really believe in these mad characters that you can create in Panto, and that you go on a journey with all of them, not just the hero, you're going on a bit of a journey with everybody. Actually, that's just so rewarding because they really care at the end, I hope. That's the idea, as opposed to, just sort of not really worrying about the story much. I think that's a shame. I think there's a way of doing both.
Have you ever played baddie?
Yeah, I loved it. First time. Oh my God. Talk about...
Who did you play?
My first baddie was Vanity in Mother Goose. So the witch who kidnaps the goose and does the spell of beauty on Mother Goose. And actually it was great. It was one of my favourites at Hackney. Not because I was in it. well, maybe. No. Actually, it was more about, it was the fact that Clive was playing Mother Goose. It was just a lot of the family were in there that had done it before. And it was just happened to be that way. But it was... Sharon and I were playing sisters. I mean, it sounds terribly sort of insular, doesn't it? We've been together 21 years. So Sharon and I were playing sisters. She was obviously the good one. I'm always been the bad one in that relationship. So in terms of that, because she's a goddess. So in terms of that, she was playing Charity. I was playing Vanity, the good and the evil. Clive was Mother Goose. There was Tony Whittle as Baron Bonkers. Tamika Empson was in it. Matt Dempsey was in it. We had the most beautiful goose that was created by Scott Brooker that just was stunning, and just you fell in love with her. And she was brought to life by Alex Ross, who was, again, what an art form to work in a suit, working in skin. Again, it's an art form that's being lost, and there is a real skill in it. And Alex was extraordinary at it and had never done it before. So that was the first time I played the baddie, and oh my God, I loved it. It was total therapy. You could just go out there and be vile. and
did you make any kids cry?
Oh yeah, and the first time I remember the second time I played Vanity, I remember, I don't know why I remember this, but I came out one day, excuse me, and I went out with a big laugh and looked down, the whole of the front row had gone. They'd just gone. They'd all decided to go, and I loved doing that with the Giant and things like that. I mean, we used to have people on door duty for the Giant coming on in Jack and the Beanstalk, and indeed King Kong coming on in Dick Whittington. There was front of house. You have to be on door duty. Do not let those children run out because they will try. And the baddie, for me was. From going from principal boy to baddie was a joy, and And I sort of had thought that my principal boy days were pretty much over by the time I hit sort of, what I've been 40s or whatever. Strangely enough, I went on as Dick Whittington. I was always the sub, so we couldn't always afford loads of understudies. So 9 times out of 10, I would understudy Clive, and indeed went on for him quite a few times. Once as Ugly Sister, and we had all film in that one. He did his hamstring in, and bless him, he came into the house. He couldn't walk, and I was like, "You can't go on like that. You've got to get to hospital. We've got to see what's going on." So there was no one. We didn't have understudies in those days, so I did it. And I went on with Tony Whittle, and you can imagine me trying to get into Clive's costumes for a start is quite funny. And also we had video in it in those days. We were doing like a Jerry Springer type skits. So, and we'd filmed Clive and Tony outside of Buckingham Palace dancing around Buckingham Palace. In fact, we nearly got arrested because in the film you saw them cross. You know the big in the middle, that, you know, the roundabout. I can't remember what that is. That thing that is in the middle.
Queen Victoria, isn't it?
Is it Queen Victoria? I can't remember. Anyway, it's whatever it is that's in the middle of that roundabout. And so we had the guys dancing as uglies, sort of crossing it, and we were filming it. We didn't know you had to have a licence. We didn't know. And in the film, you see them cross, and you see the police car with its siren and its blue light coming round and stopping at the back, and the policeman running up, and they basically were going to said, if you don't get off this in 5 minutes, you're in the van, sort of thing. And I remember Tony totally forgetting he was fully dressed in drag and went, "It's all right, Suze, I'll deal with it." I was like, "Hell no, dressed like that? Are you kidding?" So we sort of dealt with it, and then we used the film, and in the show, and of course everybody was like, "How did you get the police to do that?" And we were like, "Oh, just." We didn't like to say, "Well, actually, they were coming to arrest us."
They get their equity card.
Yes, exactly, and so. And actually, that was the one that Prince Charles came to, because it was the third panto we did before the refurb, and Prince Charles came to the opening night. Could you believe? When I think about it now, because in those days we'd have a day's tech and then we'd be on, and literally we were on, and he was there, and as well as loads of celebrities, which was the beginning of the launch of the appeal for the Hackney Empire to be refurbed. And of course, the minute that came on, and the music came in, you saw the whole of the circle lean forward to see his reaction. So yeah, I can't remember what we were saying now. Sorry, I've diverted. But yeah, I think the one thing I think I'm most proud of with Hackney was how the shows grew, and the fact that the team would pull out all the stops the way they did every year, which they will no doubt continue to do. But for me, it's just like, it was such a journey and such an amazing time. Amazing time.
How do you cope then with critics? Because you said earlier on, anybody who derides pantomime makes you very angry. How do you cope with that, and how do you educate them?
I don't know. I actually think COVID's probably helped a little bit with that, in terms of people's realising how much pantomime is underpinning a lot of our our theatres in this country. So I think a lot of people who did poo-poo it are maybe second thinking again about how important it is. The snobbery is always difficult. I think... as I said, I think I told you, even within the board, even when I was running Hackney Empire, there were some members of the board going, "Oh, you're the panto lady." It's like, oh God. And there's also that idea that it's not up there with anything. I think once you start pointing out to people, and I've done it on interviews I remember had the opportunity to be on front row, or some of those other more highbrow things where they start talking about panto, and 9 times out of 10 it's because somebody who's doing that understands what panto is. Like Robert Elms loves panto. So the idea that we could go on and actually talk about it as an art form, as a process, helps, because I think people then start to think about it in a different way. Because actually, if you do really break it down and you look at the skills needed to do it well, it's amazing, you know, and it is quintessentially British. So, and Scotland do it different, and Wales do it different, and Ireland does it different, and every city in the country and everybody doing pantomime does it differently. And that's the joy of it as well. There's no point me going, well, of course I do the definitive panto. That's absolutely rubbish. We all do our version of what we think panto is, and for the audience that we feel we've got. The critics, I don't know. I think there was always, I felt we were very lucky and very blessed that the critics came on that journey with us and actually were always often supportive. They were also pretty hard on us sometimes, in a sense that we were held on a pedestal. Hackney Empire Panto was held a little bit on a pedestal, and so therefore, you know, as the other theatres started, like, you know, Lyric Hammersmith suddenly doing pantomime, which was a good sort of 10 years into our life, it was always that thing of like, yes, well, of course, that's the posher theatre, so that's obviously going to do a better show. You know, there is a sort of, you know, ideas about that are a shame in terms of how people perceive us. But I think we've been very supported by, we have been blessed by critics coming on the ride. And then there's the ones that just don't get it, and you just have to go, well, you just don't get it, really. I guess that's it. It's like, you know, if you don't like pantomime, why are you coming to review it? I think you have to understand what it is. You don't have to love it, but I think you have to understand the art form in its own right. In order to, and I think the same about musical theatre, you know, the days of having amazing people who understood the form of musical theatre, being able to review musical theatre, is something that's really important, as opposed to someone who maybe doesn't really like musical theatre and then reviews it in a derogatory way because it's not their thing. Actually, you've almost got to take that away and review it in a way that understands the art form, whether that's musical theatre or pantomime or puppetry or magic or whatever. And you can't come it from the same cerebral, intellectual level that you might other things. But if you critique it understanding the art form and then go, well, I don't think the story was that strong, or then that's a fair enough critique, you know. I think that's fair enough. Or if you think it's too blue, I mean, I don't like blue pantos particularly. It's not my thing. It's easy to get a dick joke. But I would say there was sauciness in our shows. There were times when, you know, Clive could be saucy. I think the sauciest gag I ever wrote was one about a selfie stick, because they were big at the time, and I need to say any more, really, do I? But it was basically, my husband gave me a selfie stick, and Clive used to get out the selfie stick, and then I said, "How dare you?" or something. I can't remember what the gag was now, if I'm right. But that was about as rude as we got. There was no, and that was. And nothing was said apart from Clive's amazing delivery and the way he was cheeky about it.
Clive is very cheeky, though, isn't he?
He's cheeky, and so therefore
easy to write for as well.
Oh, he's glorious to write for, because and actually write. Early days I would write the ad libs as well. Now he does his ad libs more, but I would write the ad libs together, and the fact that he can make something feel off the cuff that might have been written is also the joy of Clive, and he's glorious to write for, and then he'll take it somewhere else. But likewise, people like Cat B and Tamika Empson and Sharon, for that matter, I wrote Caraboss for her. I couldn't believe that Caraboss came on stage, the biggest baddie you could possibly have. She came onto a roaring Chaka Khan track and would do this whole section where she was cursing and da-da-da-da-da, and then go. And you could literally feel the audience go, we don't know what to do now because we want to go, yay, because it was really good, and boo. And so they literally would go, hooray, oh no, boo. And then you'd realise they'd have to change their minds. They had to hate her.
Make your minds up.
Make your minds up, guys. and that was the joy of, you know, like someone like Cat B, you know, every show he was in, he was a different character. So writing, you know, a snowman who had a Jamaican accent, you know, and was basically Jack's father who'd been cursed, but we didn't know that till later. But, you know, playing a snowman, took it somewhere else. Playing a dragon, took it somewhere else. You know, there were, and he was one of the best King Rats I've ever seen, actually. And he played him like a schizophrenic. And I wrote it for him because we were talking about it. And I said, oh God, sometimes you're schizophrenic, you're mad like. And we were chatting, and I went, oh, you know what? And so, and I liked Jack Sparrow. I loved the idea of Jack Sparrow, and we were sort of talking about that and about how he's slightly camp and vain and that. So I wrote a Jack Sparrow-esque type King Rat for Cat. And of course, you know, when you're writing for someone like that, they just, and the same with Clive, same with all of them, they just take it somewhere else, and you're so blessed. You're just like, they just take what you've given them and run with it and change it and run with it, you know.
But they trust you and you trust them.
Yeah, there has to be about trust, I think. And in terms of over the years, there were, I mean, as I said to you before, there were lots of times when people doubted. But 9 times out of 10, the trust was there. And even if they did doubt, they'd still go with me on that journey, and the trust was there. And I guess there was also a trust from the audience too then, I think, you know, over the years. You know, you don't sort of start writing for an audience with that in mind. I had no idea when I started that 20 years later we'd still be doing it. Or the idea that people would come up to me and go, I used to come as a kid and this is my children, you know, or worse still, my grandchildren. That's when you start worrying. But the gloriousness of that, I loved being in that house because people did come up and say hi. And I had no idea, you know, and that I guess over the years the audience start to trust you. So
they know their money's going to be spent on a good night.
I hope so, yeah. They know it's worth coming to have that night. And that there's a tradition, and you know that, and I know we're not alone. And in every theatre in the country, there are people who've been coming double-figure years, or indeed, you know, it's the one time their family all go to theatre together, which again is why it's so important. You know, the whole idea. When was the last time you watched with 3 generations watch TV together? In my day, of course you did, because your dad had the remote, if there was a remote, and you would, I'm showing my age now, but also, but would decide what you watched. So of course I know Morecambe and Wise. Of course I knew Shirley Bassey and you know, and Hilda Baker and those sort of shows, and For the Love of Ada and things like that, because I watched them with my parents. You know, now kids don't have to do that. They don't have to watch their parents' favourite show. They can watch on their tablets or their computer, or indeed another telly, or 9 times out of 10 they can do that. So actually for theatre now to be able to bring generations together and also appeal to a multi-generational audience is even more important, I think, in terms of what our society needs as we're coming back in. I suppose my biggest regret is coming out of COVID that I'm not writing a show. I'm writing one in my head. I am writing one actually, but it's going to be a couple of years down the line, not this year. But even so, I do. I mean, let's face it. This government is full of clowns. It's very easy to write for in Panto in terms of the gags are all there.
We really need Panto, and the amount of Panto gags. I mean,
absolutely, and indeed the idea of, and also the idea of society and togetherness and without sounding really preachy about it, but you know, there is, you know, fairy tales have always been about morals, and over the years, and as we change, those fairy tales need to be shifted in a way that actually it may have a different moral, or indeed has shifted its story in that way. And or its emphasis. So, and I started to do that in the last few, like in Sleeping Beauty. Sleeping Beauty actually went and ended up being a warrior and ended up rescuing her own prince, and was actually brought to life by her stepmother, who was the Dame character. Because I kept thinking about who else was out there, and I thought there were loads of women and men in those audiences who may be bringing up other people's children, or indeed, and so to acknowledge that love, that sacrifice, and the idea that someone who wasn't related but who was a mother figure and their true love was what makes her up. I guess that's what I mean by shifting things a little bit and being brave about that. And actually that helps when an audience comes with you on a journey and will accept any madness that you throw at them with any luck, to the point where I did have sleepless nights about the Dick Whittington being Windrush, only in the sense that I did it I'd always wanted to do it, particularly while Sharon's mum was still alive. And it was my biggest regret that she passed away before I got a chance to do it for her. So she was always in my head all the time when I was writing it and putting it together. But I also felt a really, really big responsibility, and very much listened to the company and to other people as I was putting it together, that I did it in a respectful way, and that it wasn't trying to make a puppy show out of what is an incredible story of bravery and triumph against adversity, and indeed and something that changed the very nature of our country in the most positive way. And I think that I would never have had the guts to do that had we not had time to gain the trust of an audience and the trust of people around us. Definitely not.
Recently there's been a lot of cultural sensitivity regarding pantomime, especially Aladdin.
Yep, rightly so. I think it's time to re-look at it. It doesn't mean to say it shouldn't be done, but it's how one does it. But I think there are questions happening now about whether one should. And it is difficult. And I think Aladdin is a traditional story. And it has and so there is no reason why, for me, if you're setting up, if your shows are truly diverse, as they should be around the country, then being able to cast it properly and to cast it in a way that is not offensive and people not playing something. I think there are ways of doing it, and I think it's good that we're looking at ourselves as an industry and we're looking at what representation means on that stage. It was easy for me. No, it wasn't easy. When we did Aladdin, it was in 2018, so it wasn't that long ago. And obviously, and actually, the whole idea, the diversity and the whole idea of representation within the South Asian community was exploding, and it did make me think about what I was doing, and so I changed the story in order for it to feel, and I cast it with enough South Asian people in there to feel that there was representation, but also at the same time looked at the idea that if you created Hackney's I've always changed the title of where it's placed depending on Hackney. So, we've always gone Harkarnay has always been where Aladdin takes place in Hackney. So I just made it, and also it was Brexit time, so I just made it so that we were actually in a very multicultural place that was had been annexed from China and had decided that it was going its own way, a la Brexit. And so there was a way of changing the narrative and still having representation on stage from South Asian and Black communities and having a multi-racial cast that hopefully took the curse off of it feeling like you were being inappropriate. But it is something for people to think about. And I think if you can't, I think there's a part of me that if you can't find a way in, then don't do it, I'm not saying, you have to find the way. If you don't want to find the way and you can't find the way in, or you can't have some representation on that stage, then maybe don't do it. Or maybe change it to something else, you know. I mean, it doesn't... You know, we stopped doing Babes in the Wood. And the reason we stopped doing Babes in the Wood because it was about kidnapping children. I don't see the difference, actually, in terms of how 21st century sensibilities have changed. Having said that, we are in a terrible free fall at the moment where things are going backwards. So we're in this really weird thing, you know, where, I don't know where we're going really. But in terms of that, I think it will always be a problem. And I think representation is important. And it shouldn't just be token. And if you're going to do it. But if your audience is reflected, you know, it's also about, you know, I remember someone saying to me, you know, but, you know, we don't have any black people where we live. We don't have any multiculturalism where we live. So why, you know, we're representing who's out there. And I sort of get that. But I was like, well, what's wrong with introducing multiculturalism to a community that may not actually ever encounter it? And there's nothing wrong with that. There's also a fine line between, you know, what gags you can do and what you can't. I mean, as I said to you, I grew and became more political as I got more angry. You know, once we had the Brexit vote, I got very angry, and therefore what was happening, I actually had to feel that I had to have an outlet, which is the biggest thing about not being able to write one now, because there's so much. You know, and indeed, Puss in Boots, which is what we were going to do at Hackney, which was all about truth and lies. My God, you could have a field day. But it wasn't what Hackney Empire wanted to do, so that wasn't going to happen. But I think it's a real minefield, and I think I think it's about just thinking about who your audiences is and thinking about who you're casting and just being mindful of what you're representing. And Aladdin is a problem, and so therefore it does need a rethink. And there are ways around it if you want to do it, you know, there really are. And the best way is to cast it diversely. And it doesn't mean to say everybody needs to be South Asian to do it. But in terms of real representation, for it to all be there, for representation to be there, then you don't have a problem. There is no problem. You just tell the story with truth and heart. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's difficult, isn't it? It was always easier for me at Hackney because we've always set up the idea that whatever village, country, you know, we're either in Hackneyville or we're in, Harkarney. It was always Hackney. And because Hackney speaks 100 languages, it was always easy for me to frame a show against the fact that we were in Hackney and therefore was multicultural. It's a lot more difficult if you're in Chipping Norton. It's a lot more difficult, you know, so I'm not going, oh, well, you know, do what I do. It's not that. But there are ways around it, and it is, you know, it's good that people are thinking about what is appropriate and what is genuinely funny and what is now would be seen as not, you know. I mean, even just things like, things change. I think I said to you before, over 20 years, tastes change, people's attitudes change. I remember like Cinderella. We used to do we had a haunted bedroom scene, and the candlesticks would come to life and grab and hit people on the head and things because it was haunted. And one of the gags was it would just grab Tony Whittle's boob and go honk and then go back again. That was it. Big laughs. Children used to laugh. Everybody used to laugh. La, 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 la. You go forward 7 years. I think that's by then we were a 7-year cycle. Go forward 7 years, and I got letters about it. That was also because Hackney was held in a regard in terms of being safe, about being not blue, so therefore we were on a pedestal in that way. But I also felt that even if I got a letter about one thing, I would feel like, okay, that's not, okay, let me rethink. And we did something that was different, and that was fine. But it shocked me because I had to reevaluate because I still found it funny. But obviously I wasn't sort of, you know, reading the room, if you like. And so, I think there's nothing harm in thinking about that. I mean, I also had mad letters of I had death threats because I was portraying witchcraft in a bad way. I mean, there are the odd loony letter that you get, but if it's a genuine letter from a member of the audience who's been coming years, who has taken the time to write about that particular moment, then I have to take that on board. I do take it on board. It's a difficult one, and it's ever shifting in terms of tastes and what's funny and what isn't. But I think if pantomime is going to have a life that's going to continue and to grow and to have audiences in the future, then it has to move with the times, but it also has to keep hold of the traditions at the same time. So it's about holding on to things and letting go of some things and then bringing new things in. And for me, that's about, and also writing in layers so that the audiences are always engaged. Every age group is always engaged. And then I think it flies, because there's nothing better than being in that audience, looking out, or either being on stage and looking out, or being in the audience and seeing an audience of different age groups, and in Hackney's example, different languages, different cultures, different areas of London even, I mean, I always remember there was a guy from Chiswick who used to come every year, and I hadn't spoken to him, and then he would always say hi, and we'd picked him out one night, and so he always remembered. And he came, and I was chatting to him, and I said, and it was something he said. Well, I remember it was, and I said, so what makes you come to Hackney? Where do you live? And he's like, oh, we live in Richmond, so it's much easier now because we can come round on the North London line. But, obviously, we just like coming because it's such an experience. And I was like, well, what's different? Oh, when do I sit in an audience, and there's everybody, there's black people, there's everybody, and I'm sitting in an audience that I never sit with. I'm sitting somewhere where I don't meet these people unless I'm here. And that's interesting, isn't it? That's immediately a dialogue, and there's immediately something there that is about social cohesion and what that means. And the fact that, he used to love to question some of the patois and want to know about it and whatever. But I think, we only understand each other if we can laugh at ourselves as well. So there's a fine line sometimes, but I think the idea of laughing with people, laughing at yourself is a great bond and a great way of bringing people together. So I guess, yes, for pantomime to move forward, it does need to really, really embrace what we might have to do to heal now we're going forward. I mean, I guess that's the other regret in terms of not writing one this year, in the sense of there's an amazing power to heal with any piece of theatre, with any piece of entertainment. But the idea that you can be enjoying it with people who are totally different to you, even more reason why. I think there's a lot of healing to be done in terms of how we all are with each other and how we see each other and where we are. And also we're coming out of this dreadful time of great loss. And there's something about that pantomime can really heal and be a step towards that. Would be nice to think so, anyway.
It's feel good, isn't it?
It is.
And when you're hearing about it in the news, they're saying, is pantomime going to be back this year? They're not saying, is Shakespeare or Ibsen or anything else coming back? No, it's pantomime.
Yeah, because there's also there are people that only go to the theatre to see a pantomime. That's fine. It is one of those, pantomime is something that as I said, it's often the first time at the theatre for kids, but it might be for adults too. And so, or it's their one trip a year, fair enough. And it is something that's always been a tradition in our lives as kids and all of that. So, yeah, you're right. They are saying, is Panto coming back? Because the importance of it and the recognition, I love the fact that Hackney Empire Pantomime Aladdin is in the V&A. We were filmed and it's there in the archive. I love the fact that our Brexit dress is in there, and in Lottie Collette's design is in there, and there's other costumes in there. And that's right, you know, and other pantomimes are represented too. And I think, you know, we do need to hold on to it, and it is important to people to hope that it happens, because I think you're right, it's feel good, and we bloody well need that right now.
We're bored of Netflix.
We are bored of Netflix, and yeah, and I think you're right, and I think we also want to. There's something about wanting to participate, and like in any pantomime, the audience is the last cast member. You know, the rhythm of the show. You can get the rhythm of the show absolutely tight as you want, tight as a drum in the rehearsal room, and all about pace and and of course you're constantly trying to remind the cast that there's another element here. There's the laughs, there's the applause, there's the random chat, and of course you then see how in a preview period how a show will find its rhythm, and it's because the audience will give you that fine beat, that last beat of the rhythm of the dialogue of everything. And indeed, with a school's audience, it has one beat, with a family audience another, and with an adult audience another. With a black audience, it has a different one altogether. You mix that together and you're in a different place. So there's, you know, the audience are so important. And so the idea that we're feel good and there's a way of healing, I think there's nothing more inclusive than pantomime in that way. So yeah, Panto will be back this year. It will. It has to be. The biggest problem is that no one can really afford to do a socially distanced Panto, not unless you're the National, which is odd that they decided to do Panto. I sort of get it, but I don't get it, if you know what I mean. But at the same time, you know, it was nice that there was, you know, they did do that. But yeah, it was hard from everybody not to be doing it last year. It was very hard. And I pray that it will be okay this year. I hope so. It better be, because we do need it. We do need it. We do need to, you know. And I'm just sad because I've got nowhere to vent my spleen. I've got nowhere to.
This year anyway.
This year anyway. Yeah. Yeah. Watch this space. It's coming.
Don't you fancy doing a summer panto?
I've always thought about that. We've talked about it. We did. For a long time, I kept trying to persuade Hackney to do it, and they just didn't want to.
Or Easter.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to be said for doing Easter. You know, God forbid if Christmas can't come, then we just move it to Easter. Of course, the runs can't be as long over Easter. But yeah, I think there's something in it. I think it's something whether. I guess the nature of the shows might change a little bit, but you could still do a pantomime type summer show quite easily, you know. And I think, you know, we might get to the point where we might have to be doing that. Hopefully
let's
not.
Hope not.
No, let's hope not. I think, yeah, we'll see. But yeah, I've always thought that there's something about pantomime at Christmas. Yeah, everybody's traditional and everything. But I think the style of a pantomime and doing something that's a summer romp. I mean, let's face it, that's what Joseph is, really, and how Joseph, for years, you know, would, like, rep theatres. Like Leicester Haymarket did Joseph in the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, I think 4, 5, 6 years running, every summer. I know because I was in the children's choir, so I remember it well. Every year, you know, we would be in it. And, you know, that was as close to a summer pantomime as you could get, really, in that way. So I think there's lots of room for that. There's more. I think there's a lot to be said for doing real feel good stuff over the next, you know, few years. But I think, you know, one problem with that is that you don't want it just to be something that's just fun and the lowest common denominator, in that it's like, well, it's to get it on as cheap as possible and all of that. You know, we are up against it in our industry in terms of keeping artistic levels high and at the same time being able to afford to do the work we want to do when we don't know how many can be in the audience. And I think until we can know for sure how many people can be in an audience, I think it's incredibly difficult for particularly commercial theatre to understand what we can do. I mean, look at the West End relies heavily on coach parties and the tourists. You know, London audiences alone are not enough to, I don't believe, to give a run of a West End show the footfall it needs. It's slightly easier with regional theatre, and indeed, I guess for regional theatre and indeed, say, a London theatre that has its own audience and a London-wide audience like Kiln. Of course, we've got audiences coming, but you know, whilst we're socially distanced, there's no money to be made. So even if we have to socially distance into the autumn, that will still hit us financially too, without support. But for the commercial people, I can understand why they're worried, why they're tired, whilst wanting to work and wanting to get stuff out there. Until we, as I say, you can't budget for anything unless you know how many people can come. And that's what's hard, I think. The uncertainty is what's hard, you know. But having said that, I'm really hopeful that we will be up and running again. I'm just not sure how soon, but I think we will be at some point. And I will definitely do a pantomime again. I would definitely do one again. Yeah. And as I say, I really do miss the fact that there's so much amazing material to be writing about right now. And also the idea that you can write something that might in some way begin to heal, you know, just have people, hearing people laughing and healing and, you know, just being together is something very, very special in any show. But there's something about the Panto audience and hearing gags you've written land, but also hearing them. You know, my favourite ones is when you've put a song in a show and nobody really knows it, but you know that the kids know it, and then literally when you start and the first school's audience all sing along, there's nothing better, you know. There's nothing better than realise that there's that sense of ownership and them all singing in their tiny little voices, you know, and it's just beautiful, you know, it's lovely. And then, of course, when the adult comes in and he goes, nobody cares, goes right over their heads, but I don't care. It doesn't matter. It's that those audiences at that point in time really get what you're trying to say to them, that this show is for you as well. This is for you. I don't care if the adult in the audience doesn't understand it, but you understand it. And there's a respect for the kids' audience that is really important to me, you know. And Kenneth used to instill that in us, you know. Woe betide you if you in any way dissed the story or didn't be truthful to, you know, sort of like making the golden eggs feel heavy, you know. There was you know, you had the whole idea of the kids believing the magic, and if you didn't believe the magic, then how can you expect them to the point where it got me knocked out. I remember we had the golden eggs, and I was playing Jack and the Beanstalk for Kenneth, and somehow, you know, he said, wherever those eggs go, you have to get them, you can't let anyone else touch those eggs, they're really important. I was like, okay, so I know. And so they drop sometimes, and I'd always pick them up, make sure they're heavy. Yeah, okay. So all the time we'd be picking them up. And anyway, one day it fell into, it rolled, the golden egg rolled, and it rolled down the treads into the audience. So the onus was on me to go and get it, because Kenneth would have killed me if I hadn't. So I literally ran down, and as I did, I went, and it was the beginning of In the Money, the song that we were about to sing, but the golden egg was in the audience. So I was like, oh, Christ. So I literally ran down. And of course, as I did, the lighting change happened, and it all went really dark, because it was supposed to just be a spot on me at the back of the set, going, we're in the money. And of course, it wasn't. There was me running into the audience trying to get the golden egg, because I knew Kenneth would kill me if I didn't pick it up. And as I did, I rolled down the treads, and I caught one of the speakers in the corner of my head and went out. And all I remember is this guy coming to waking me up. I couldn't have been out for very long, because the intro was still playing. But he just went, are you all right, my duck? You all right? And I was like, yeah. Where's the egg? Oh my God. And I didn't know where I was. thought, oh shit, all the kids were coming on, so I thought, I can't go up the treads. So I ran round and I kept thinking, God, it's really hot in here and I'm sweating. Why am I sweating? And of course I went from darkness to darkness, went round, put my tap shoes on, ready to come on and finish the number. And of course it went build up, da, 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 da. Bam, I'm supposed to be at the back going, we're in the money. And I was covered in blood because, of course, what I thought was sweat was blood. And I just looked like a horror film. And you saw everybody, you saw the lights come in and literally people went, ah, like this, because it just looked like something out of Carrie. But that was about, God, Kenneth Allen Taylor would kill me if I didn't carry on with the truth of the story and go and get the egg. And so, yeah, I think that's the joy of it. It's so much fun. I mean, if I think about over the years, all the laughs we've had, and so often, because sometimes we haven't always been able to afford things, things like, I used to have Godzilla at one point in one panto, and Carl Paris, who was a choreographer but was in the ensemble at that time, we could only afford the polystyrene head. We couldn't afford the body, just the head. So he was on his head, and he was operating it so it was coming around the set on a plinth, so it looked like a big monster. And of course one day he just kicked the flat, and the flat fell down, and he's there in a lycra suit and this head, having no idea that the audience could see. And I think Clive took about 10 minutes to get it together. It was a long time before anybody got it together, but that's the joy of
the joy, and that's the nights that people love as well.
Of course, they go, I was there, were you there when? I mean, Kenneth he'll no doubt tell you, but Kenneth would love moments where we'd have corpsing and false corpsing, and it would made to feel like it was fresh. So there was many a time we go, well, I was there when he kicked your bow and arrow away, and you think, yeah, he was doing that every night. But then, but it was just how you made it feel like it was impromptu. And then, of course, there's the nights when there really is madness happening, and it really does, terrible things happen as well. Like we had a UV scene, and we had a mouse fall off the stage. When I say a mouse, a child dressed as a mouse danced their way off the stage and into the top of the tuba, and the poor guy Dave, who was playing the tuba, I mean, he was in shock, and it nearly took his teeth out. And the child, God love her, was literally with her feet out of the and we're laughing now, but my God, it was awful at the time. And
there's a show report.
But there's a show report and a half. I tell you, that's a show report and a half. Yeah. So there was, yeah. So yeah, there is stuff like that is in any theatre show incredible. But in Panto, I don't know. Sometimes they just seem to be madder than others, and glorious memories for it. Really, really glorious. Such a great time.
Well, this leads me on to my last question. Your dream pantomime. So you can choose the production.
Mm-hmm.
You can be in it.
Mm-hmm.
You can be in the stalls watching it. Your choice of cast can be alive or dead or a mixture of both.
Oh, wow, okay.
And you can choose a venue as well.
Oh, it'd be the Palladium. Only because I've never done a panto. I'm so in awe of the Palladium pantos I used to go and see as a kid, and as a young adult who was coming into the business. I was lucky enough to see Danny LaRue and people like that in them. I guess I'd love to do something at the Palladium. I guess my favourite pantomime is still Mother Goose, actually. And I know it's not done very much, but it is the most incredible story, and it's the most moral, and there's something beautiful about it. So yeah, I mean, Clive would still be my definitive Mother Goose. I mean, he is amazing in it. I guess I'd do it with the cast I did it with before, and I'd play Vanity. But if it was fantasy cast, oh God, I don't even know where to start. I've always thought there are certain people I think would be amazing dames. I think Simon Russell Beale would be an amazing dame. I don't know if he'd ever do it, but it's quite amazing. I think I'd love, Arthur Askey. I mean, to be on, to have like a cast of some of those real old pros that were in Panto of all those years ago. I mean, John Inman, for example. The idea of bringing a couple of those to life. If I'm really honest, the person it would be to bring back to life would be Stanley Baxter. Because
He's still with us.
Oh, of course he's not. God, you better cut that bit out. I meant in terms of being able to be on pantomime. Of course. God. It would be Stanley though, because in terms of that, the way he used to use his characters in Panto, the way he used to use his voice, the masterful way he would be, I can imagine him playing Mother Goose and being incredibly moving as well. The thing about Mother Goose is it's the hardest one. It's the Hamlet of dames, I think, in that you have to be prepared to be nasty in it. And as a dame, that's not de rigueur. You know what I mean? In terms of really being nasty. Yes, you can be cheekily put down and you can put down the baddie, or you might put down the bloke in the audience or whatever, but you're never nasty. If you're ever nasty, you isolate the audience immediately. It's about delivering something with warmth, but at the same time you can be quite cutting. But Stanley Baxter, the idea that I can just imagine the idea that the pathos with which he would bring to that role, much as Clive did, but I think I can imagine him really bringing something different to it, and someone like Chicha Rivera playing something like Vanity would be amazing. Can you imagine if you really got sort of one of those artists to do it? Similar to the part that she played in The Killer Kissing a Spider Woman, something like that. I suppose if I'm really honest, more than anything, it would be to do a new version of Mother Goose, but with the budget that I've always wanted. and I probably wouldn't change the cast that much to the Hackney one, really. And just have them have the chance to be in a show that where money was no object would be amazing, to really be able to do something that blew people's minds, that the magic pool would just blow your mind, as they would in those days, in the old days, the really old days in the late 70s. Or even earlier. I mean, there was some stuff went on that stage. You go, how the hell did they do that? But I'm also proud at Hackney that the amount of time I remember catching two quite well-known producers having bets over how much a certain show cost at Hackney, and they were a few noughts out of it. I mean, in terms of they thought it had cost a lot more than it had, which was down to the artistry and the passion and the skill of the team at Hackney to make a reasonable budget go a long way. But to have money is no object, I would do Mother Goose, I think, and have flying and madness and the magic pool that blew your head off. I think I would do that. Or Dick Whittington, Windrush again. Or The Sleeping Beauty I'm telling you about, but I can't tell you about because it's supposed to be hush-hush in terms of what I'm doing.
Will you tell me once we finish recording?
Yeah, of course I will. Seeing as it's
Thanks
you.
for taking part. I can't wait to find out.
But there's always something else. There's always some other story to tell as well. There might be nice to almost think about a new title in some day, about what that means and where one could take it. Obviously there are more titles than the 7 that I wrote, but I think there's something about creating a new story that could be done in a pantomime way is quite interesting. In terms of what that means, in terms of a family show. Maybe your summer panto idea, in that sense of what that is. So
you could try that out and test the waters first and see.
Yeah, in a small way, and see what happens with that. It's just so important that the art form is kept alive and is appreciated, and people understand what it takes to be in them, and how fearless and talented people have to do to really do it well. I mean, the idea of ad-libbing, you see some of these comics and some of these people on the big commercial ones, and in any panto, the gift of ad-libbing is, you know, it is astounding what people can do and how quick they can be. You know, Bob Monkhouse was the quickest in the business. I mean, my God, you know, what he could do and how many gags he held in his brain. Extraordinary. You know, it was almost Guinness Book of Records time, isn't it? You know, it's like... and the ease at which people have with the audiences, you know, that idea of it being easy with them. It's not something you can teach. It's something that is done after years of grafting and maybe falling on your arse sometimes, or, you know, maybe dying sometimes in terms of, you know, how you're delivering and learning, and those, you know, those artists learning their craft all the time. That's certainly how I felt in terms of, you know, building up what you do and building up the nerve to do something different with an art form that is so traditional.
Well, Susie, thank you so much for taking part in the Panto podcast.
It's an absolute joy. Thank you so much, Aidan. Thank you.